what we are interested in are those developments in the life sciences that we feel need more cultural scrutiny.
Hi, Oron and Ionat. Great to see you both. This interview is part of a series of interviews we're doing with artists to talk about their practice and the studios that support their practice. So my first question to you both is, tell us a little bit about you as a creative team and your practice and the kind of studio that supports that practice.
Yeah, so we've been working with living biological materials for the last 25 years. We are working with fragments of complex bodies that are grown in artificial environments. Both of us are artists, but we both established this idea of working in the most experiential way with the living materials that we're engaged with manipulating.
So our studio, our artistic studio, if you want, is quite unusual. It is actually a scientific lab, a tissue engineering lab. And that involves working with different laboratories around the world and meeting wonderful scientists around the world and creating sculpture, living and semi-living sculptures. We have the lab that is called SymbioticA, which is dedicated to artists who work with those kind of living systems in scientific laboratories.
Given that that's quite a different studio to many artists, you know, working in the laboratory space, has that been a difficult space to carve out for you?
It was a struggle. So when it comes to trying to gain access to those very scarce resources, scientists are not that territorial, but they are obviously a bit wary about other people kind of coming and working with the very expensive equipment they have and so forth. So it takes a really long time to build trust. We worked really hard for many, many years in order to establish the understanding that artists should have equal access to those resources. Artistic research should be seen as important as any other type of research, which means that we were able at SymbioticA, for example, to establish, as far as we know, we were the first place in the world that had its own dedicated level 2 biological lab dedicated specifically for artistic research. And in a sense, by that, making it into more of a studio than the scientific lab.
We're also very good in, we are kind of ambassadors between these two worlds. And I'm trying not to talk in a binary term because I don't think that there's, you know, there are differences in methodologies and technologies, but also there are things that we all share, kind of trying to understand living system, trying to make meaning of what's happening to life at the moment when we, you know, making living system a technology. So we're very good, I believe, Oron and I, in being able to talk both to artists, scientists, and the public in a language that hopefully everyone understands.
Obviously, as you have negotiated in those spaces, it's involved collaboration across a lot of different disciplines. And of course, your own artistic project, the Tissue Culture and Art Project, is one of collaboration of you two as individual artists working together. And I'm interested in how you collaborate in terms of your creative practice. But also, I mean, Tissue Culture and Art Project started late 90s, if I'm correct. So your practice has been going now for 20 years and technology has shifted over that time. So I'm curious to know how much the technology in the spaces has impacted and made potentially changes to your creative practice.
For Oron and I, art and life is combined in many ways. And that's how we collaborate. So we grow sculptures, semi-living sculptures together and making art together. We also growing children together and living together. So the collaboration is very, very messy and life is messy. So that's actually a great thing.
The original idea was that we would enter the lab, I would do the work with the tissue and Ionat would document it because we never believed that we'll be able to show our live tissue engineered sculptures outside of the lab and bring them into galleries and other spaces. But very shortly, Ionat got really into the tissue culture aspect, and she's a way better tissue culturalist than I am now. So the idea of the craft of tissue culture seemed to work really well with her. When it comes to new developments, so there's some really interesting things that some of those fundamental questions are still the same. The technology around trying to make it easier for researchers is improving. So in a sense, there's what's being referred to as de-skilling. You don't need to have a PhD in biology in order to do things that 20 years ago you had to basically spend a lot of time learning. But we do spend a lot of time looking at scientific literature, because what we are interested in are those developments in the life sciences that we feel need more cultural scrutiny. And by definition, it also generates increasing kind of complexity of the palette of artistic possibilities to engage with life. So as engineers and scientists are developing new ways of manipulating life, it opens the opportunity for us as artists to come in and work with those same techniques as in a sense, you know, and this is something artists always done, was to work with the material in many different ways. And in our case, that material is obviously life. Saying that, in recent years, we decided to go low tech. So we are trying to almost reverse engineer some of those technologies and try to make them even simpler. So for example, we developed what we refer to as a pre-cybernetic incubator. So using technologies that have been available for hundreds of years and showing how you can actually make lab equipment using kind of a different approach and actually kind of going backwards and simplifying it.
Going back to the idea of now we're trying to look at a different kind of technologies and maybe, you know, kind of more, I would say more contextualized. We're looking at life in a more contextualized way. So in laboratory, you are taking a living system or life form and you isolating it in order to be able to do all sorts of things. But by isolating it, you're losing so many aspects, and sometimes you go into a reductionist view that takes away from the, you know, the whole picture. And I think especially today, and especially when we are witnessing, you know, climate crisis, and also through our experience, we saw how some of our most critical artworks were used in a different way, taking away our critique and used for kind of a celebration of technology. We are trying different kind of I guess, ways in looking into artworks. And one of them is to play between taking, you know, the ecology from the outside into the lab, ecologized life forms within the lab, and vice versa, taking things that are produced in the lab and trying and make them outside in the context of the environment.
So one final question I have for you is, we've touched on a work that from very early on in your collaborative practice. I'm interested in what you're working on now. Can you talk about a project that you've either recently worked on or you are working on currently?
So we are developing a project that we hope to actually show in Tasmania in the end of the year, and that's it's still in very early stages, but it's very much to do with the points that Ionat raised, where we're looking at this kind of new suite of kind of techno-fetishistic approaches to sustainability that seem to, more often than not, because they're decontextualized, to miss a lot of the points that they're trying to solve. And one of them is the idea of being able to grow parts of animals or even parts of plants in the lab, as if the lab is some kind of a neutral, magical space that doesn't have any footprint. So there's growing kind of a assumption that somehow if we outsource biology to technology, it's going to solve issues around sustainability. It's really also talking about kind of the way in which contemporary modes of thinking about how we're going to solve the problems that we created in the first place are somehow natural because we're working with living systems. But in a sense, the logic that drives it sees nature as an obstacle that needs to be overcome. And our aspiration to control living systems and at the very same time claiming that are somehow compatible with the environment around us. And it's the very same mindset that actually got us into this mess to start with.